Catus Maximus here, this time with a promotional product from Vevor, 30 kilogram or 65 pound adjustable rotary welding table. That's exactly what it is, like a potter's wheel, but spins real slow. I'm starting off in this position because a lot of people are confused about this whole welding wand. This thing comes with a little pigtail, and so this is kind of a crossover where it's can be used for more production oriented welding rather than just one-off. These things run, I think on Amazon this is like $500 or $600, which is actually a pretty good price for a 30 kilogram unit of this. These things can be very expensive, and these cheaper ones, if you're gonna just starting out, etc., actually work just great. And they can take more weight in the vertical or when the table's in the horizontal position than they advertise, but that's just a safe weight essentially. But people get confused. This whole thing is designed to hold up a wand. It has a pigtail, so if you have a real commercial welder, that's just a relay, an on-off, and all that does is some welders have the ability to operate this little trigger via an electrical connection. And so the idea is you would have it set up. You could either step on the pedal, or it has a timer so you can set it up where it's timed, where it'll do one 360-degree run, hit start, and what it'll do is it'll activate the welder and rotate all automatically, run the weld, and then when the timer runs out, it turns off the welder. And then the reason that they have these geared adjustment knobs is so that you can, as soon as you, well, you need two hands, you're going to kind of hold it. You would use that if you're doing multiple passes, is to do a very small adjustment for the next pass, tighten it up, and run the process again. You can kind of adjust this to hold your arm, but that's kind of the deal, is this thing can be flipped this way, this arm can be put in either side. If you're in a position here where maybe that's not exactly the angle you want, you can adjust the position of the weld gun in the clamp. You can also, this is just a rack that's held in by screws, and you can remove this rack and then be able to rotate it this way. You can of course rotate it this way. So that's the whole deal with this clamp. Anyway, I'm going to pull this off here for the rest of the review. I will say this assembly and that whole tube and the machine work to cutting the teeth is a portion of the price, that's for sure. This is a bunch of different castings, and this is also something that that's a separate accessories on more expensive ones. What I mean by more expensive, you're looking at $1,000 to $1,500 for like a real professional grade one. And perhaps unsurprisingly, these things are made in totally industrial sizes. I was looking around, saw ones that were rated for 5 tons, you know, more than, or 11,000 pounds. So I guess that was 5.5 tons. Here's a look. It just bolts to the back of the box. Surprisingly enough, there's another set of 4 bolt holes, but more widely spaced on the front. The final reduction here actually has a nice metal shield. It's a DC motor, brushed, but it will essentially last forever because it's really low speed. This is just an 1800 RPM motor, and at the 12 RPM max advertised speed, which is really too fast for welding, but these things actually have a variety of uses. It's 150 to 1 gear ratio because this is a geared head motor. You can see, well, maybe you can't. You can just see, but there's a big gearbox, so it's an expensive motor because has a built-in gear reduction box, and then the second one here essentially will last forever. More than enough torque, 80 watts, and even at the very lowest speed you can hold on to this and it'll spin itself around. I'll show that. This whole assembly is actually pretty rigid. On these slightly larger ones, they're easier to deal with because you have a hand crank and this worm gear, which also means that when it's tilted over, you don't have to clamp down or tighten really hard on clamps and worry about it drifting. It will stay right in the same position. The advertised weight capacity is cut by half. They say only 15 kilograms, or about 32 pounds. And this, when the plate's in the horizontal position, or when the work, or in the vertical position where the work is in the horizontal position, just prevents strain. You can't overload it as much, but you can get away with a few welds with something that's quite a bit heavier. I mean, it has big holes. They put reinforcing plates under these tubes so it can be bolted down. And once again, I've tried it. I had this in the vertical position and stood on it, and it, supported my weight just fine. It's just not meant to, it can cause overheating in the motor and that stuff. But how many times, that's kind of why I like this 30 kilogram one, is because it's a nice combination of speed and performance. And it just has a giant carbon brush, and what you're supposed to do is actually unbolt the welding cable. You're not supposed to take your welding grounding clamp and clamp onto this. You're supposed to unbolt the clamp from the cable and then use the bolt to clamp this to the grounding wire on your welder to get a proper connection. It's a huge brush, rated at 100 amps. And it just provides a lot of surface area. You can find these that are copper impregnated that will give it, that are rated for 150 amps or more. But a 100 amp brush really isn't too bad. It has a nice insulating piece that it's mounted to. It helps prevent transfer of heat from the brush to the body of the tool, as well as give you a little bit of electrical isolation.
I also wanted to point out this has a through hole. It's only 1 inch, but there's certain situations where you're welding something round and you actually want to have shielding gas run through the inside too to prevent oxidization, and so this allows purge gas to run through the center of the part. But it's not particularly common that they have through holes. You have to kind of specifically look for it. Vevor has 3 different sizes. This one, a big 50 kilogram or 120 pound unit, and a little small 10 kilogram or 20 pound unit. And this mid-sized one is the only one that has a purge hole.
Here we are talking about the top. This is a more kind of rudimentary. It's kind of like a lathe chuck, but just a more rudimentary version just for basic holding. People don't mind this adjustment, but they don't like the way these arms hang off. So it gives mass, so it's easier to fling these things open. And you have a ton of range. And remember, you can pull these jaws out and flip them around, and then use these inside edges to grab the outside diameter of something really large. Or when you flip it around, these inside faces are facing outwards, and you can grab the inside diameter of something extra large. Which leads into one of the things when you're not just welding something around, is because these chucks can hold stuff that's, any shape. You can get something like this in there. And let me turn up the speed here. And then you can use this just as a positioner, so you can... Actually, which direction I'm going the wrong way. So you can be like this position, do some welding here. Make sure I don't crush my own wires. Hit the plate, have it rotate around, and then be able to do another weld here. Is another reason, is instead of you having to totally reposition yourself, you can have like a table, stool, what have you, to have your arm set up so you actually have a nice, comfortable, and well-controlled position. And then you just use the rotary table to spin things around into the right position. You do your weld. And yes, people have done stuff like spray painted stuff, that kind of things on there. It's not super recommended, but you can totally get it. I mean, it's an industrial turntable. You may want to pull out the brush and put some masking tape on the bottom edge where the brush runs. Other than that, yeah, you could use this as just a rotary table just to, paint stuff. If you're deburring parts, and you can cut off a part and then have it spin around, do some deburring operations. Another thing to mention about is you can tilt it 90 degrees. It's easier to put drill holes when you're going downwards, so you can just use it to, just as a normal rotary table, drill holes in the side of something, rotate it just a few degrees, and then drill your next set of holes. Another tip is, some people, in rare situations, if you have like a really oblong item, then as it swings around in this horizontal position, the weight will kind of want to pull it this way or tilt the table that way. It's actually pretty tight, but there is a little bit of backlash in the worm gear. You have to have some clearance, the gears will bind. But one of the tricks is just loosening up these bolts and trying to shift it around. If there's not enough space, and you remove the hand wheel and use like a little round file, make sure you get the angle right and you're filing up at this angle. And just make a little extra space at the top of each hole so you can adjust the screw to your liking. Pretty heavy duty construction, welded, spacer bars there. Pretty heavy duty load bearings that they have, assemblies, all billet steel right there. And one last thing to mention is just 3 bolts. You can just pull the chuck off, and then you just have this platen. So you can just use it as a small, just flat surface for welding. You can use the T-slots. This thing gets jammed. T-slots to bolt stuff down. The chuck is held together. This threaded ring, spiral ring, is held in by a snap ring. So you pull off those 3 bolts and the chuck just lifts off as one assembly. Make sure you wipe that down the back of the chuck and the table when you put it back on. But you can pull it off, use the bolt holes to bolt stuff down, or use these T-slots. Getting to the control box, as with these, what we have is we have a power here. Actually, I think if I do it in auto, well, not when it initially starts. So, direction switch, clockwise or counterclockwise. Oh, I don't have any speed on this. We have an automatic mode. It says restart, but that is actually start timer. And as I alluded to in the beginning of the video, it's really, this timer is designed so you set your speed, count how long it takes for it to make 1 revolution, and then you set that time, and then you can press this. This lock button, as I alluded to before, this trigger here is actually just an on and off relay to these 2 wires. It doesn't put out a voltage, it just closes it and opens a circuit. So when you press the pedal, it will also close the circuit. It's also one of the simplest modifications, no matter what kind of welder you, well, I should say what kind of MIG welder you have. If you have a wire drive welder, then it's going to have just a little switch to start welding. And even if you don't have like terminals on the back of the welder, you can just pull off the case. It's real obvious the 2 thin little wires that are coming out of the big cable thing for the trigger, and you just wire 2 parallel wires to a little set of terminals on the back, maybe even like an RCA jack or something, and then that will allow this automation to work. This lock button, people didn't know, it's very confusing, but you have the option, and this lock button really needs an indicator light, which it does not have, and it's the most frustrating thing. But you have the option that when you start a cycle, you can either have it engage this trigger, or you can have it just rotate without engaging. So what this does is you can basically, quote unquote, unlock it, spin it around, make sure everything's set up correctly, and then engage the lock, so the next time that you hit the cycle start, it will actually engage the welder. That's the function of the lock button. It is not explained in the manual. And down here at the bottom is our little timer, which kind of pulls out a little bit. I do not like that, but it is a neat timer. And I have to shine a bright light because a lot of people don't know how these work. These are buttons on top, so stupid light. So I can press that, and it's seconds, minutes, or hours, and minutes, seconds, and it rotates around. So that would be 10 seconds. It's always, the middle position would always be the decimal point. So this is 10 seconds. Now it would run for 10 minutes. Now it would run for 10 hours. It would run for 10 hours and 10 minutes in that situation. So that's how this timer works, is you set the scaling seconds, minutes, and hours, and then set the exact time that you want. So if I wanted 5 seconds, there's our 5 seconds. It'll run and click off. And that's the whole point to this timer there, is all really to deal with the automated trigger, so that you can use this if you're starting out doing some type of production welding where you're regularly welding round objects. Then you can get one of these and kind of help speed up the process, plus with that whole overarm support, make sure you get consistent welds. And that's kind of why they included this whole system, is because of that. It's for both the heavy duty weekend warrior as well as a cheap starter welding table that will certainly last long enough to make you enough money to buy one of the expensive ones. This is as slow as it'll go, really slow. Plenty slow enough to even just a nice light deposition of weld. There's earlier versions which had like gray motors, and like I think some of them were yellow. This is like a revised edition where they've made adjustments to this box to where even though this 12 RPM seems really fast maximum, they've adjusted it so you can go super duper slow like this. And interestingly enough, I don't know if it has load sensing or if it's just a super high gear ratio, but it has. Even at a lot of times with these kind of variable speed systems, when you're at the lowest speeds, it's really restricting the power, so it has a lot less power than if you're at higher speeds. And so at low speeds, you can have issues with low torque. But this thing runs totally smooth. There's no noises, no indication of any oblong gears. But if I just hold this even at the slowest speed, I mean, it'll rotate itself around. This thing weighs like 60 or 70 pounds. These are like standard connectors, so if you have any issue, you can actually unscrew these, open these things up, and actually resolder them and fix them, which is at least decent. They did put a nice long, like 10, it's probably a 3-meter cable, so about 10-foot wire on the foot pedal. And something else that confused some of the reviewers is why this box comes off. It's because this is still generally a, portable unit, and it's so you can just pull this box off and not have it get the tar beat out of it being on the side of this thing. So you can pull it off, easier to transport and safer, and then you can just attach the box back to the side of the unit. Personal preference, I kind of wish they would have just integrated it into the bottom. It could have been, instead of these two posts, the box could have been part of this lower structure and out of the way. Although being on the bottom, it would encounter just a whole bunch of welding spatter and debris, so maybe this was the best kind of compromise they could do for this. Quick note, most of the fasteners are actually pretty tight, except for a couple of these lower ones on the rod, and actually some of these side ones. So you want to double check that the fasteners are tight. It's one of the ways they save money is assembly. Pretty simple inside here. It would be generous to actually call this a switching power supply. I think it just provides a lower voltage to drive the relay and the clock. And surprisingly enough, this is a 110 volt DC motor, so you can see some really large diodes that are going to be for giving it pulse, converting the AC to pulse DC to drive that motor. The looseness in this has a ratcheting like back support, so actually I was able just to, it just wasn't ratcheted, it wasn't pushed all the ratchet into the final position. Fix that up. Otherwise, internal wiring, I can't complain. At least they put zip ties on everything. Screw down terminals on anywhere where there's crimp or spade terminals. I actually put a touch of hot glue. We do have a safety fuse. Pretty simple, but at least the wiring's pretty solid and obviously real easy to get into if you ever have to. I think the only real thing you need to worry about is maybe this relay. I think it's amusing. You can see that there's a red LED. So the relay actually has a light letting you know when it's turned on. Which seems oddball because that's that is an option. Having an LED indicator integrated into the relay seems like an oddly expensive option. Also, this relay, if we look, is socketed. So if you ever have any issues, it's like super easy to pop out, and it just has these clips that hold it in, which is kind of surprising as well. And on the last note, I was realizing that they just paint the outside. Oddly enough, the panels that they made this out of are painted on both sides. And I should mention the silver box has the thyristor circuit, which is adjusting variable speed too. And if this doesn't go slow enough, there's either an adjustment behind that silver cover inside here, or you can add another resistor just in line with this dial. It won't go as fast, but it'll allow you to go a little bit slower. Other than that, looking around once again online, I think that these are competitively priced, and seeing how it's actually built and was shipped in a decent crate. Top part of the crate was a little flimsy, but the feet were bolted down into the heavy duty pieces of wood that acted as skids for the crate, so they do try to package it pretty decently. Probably jostling is why it had some of the loose fasteners, but overall, I mean, it's a neat little table, and once again for me it's going to have more than one use than just welding, as basically being something that you can tilt and hold round stock in. Obviously you wouldn't want to use it as a vise and like pound out roll pins and that type of stuff with it. But certainly it can help with deburring parts, odd shaped objects where you're not going to rotate continuously, but you're just using it to rotate to a certain position. Certainly handy. And when you want to have just a rotary table to spray paint stuff, it actually would work just fine. You could even tear a trash bag and kind of just stretch it around it so it would protect everything down low. Heck, even, you know, remove the brush and even put a bag over the top, and it would be great as a, you know, once again, a painting rotary table, or for sanding and polishing. Like Vevor had sent me this, you know, pipe curved and odd shaped surfaces belt sander. And so putting a round object in this and having it rotate, you can go around and sand the whole entire 360-degree outside area using this sander, and this is a rotary table. So I'm actually kind of stoked to have picked this up. Or that they sent it to me, I should say. Anyway, thanks for watching, and you can check out the link in the description. Really appreciate everybody who's been subscribing and commenting. We'll see you in the next video.